One life sign detected. Continuing search.
When I first heard the creator of Dead Space was directing a new survival horror game, I was injected with anticipation like a needle to an unsuspecting bioweapon victim. Dead Space is one of the greatest survival horror games ever made, and me being skeptical as to whether we needed a remake or not, I was more excited for this new spiritual successor, a brand new series in the horror game market, the Callisto Protocol. Having now finished the Callisto Protocol, it is clearer to me now more than ever that this is not simply Dead Space 4 disguised in a prison jumpsuit, but a hollow attempt at living up to the genre in general, despite some decent ideas of its own that pulled me through to the finish line of my roughly 9-hour playthrough.
I do hope you've enjoyed your stay at Black Iron.
As much as I tried, I am not one of the many who think they are the only one to have liked the game. Devoid of any real terror, excitement, and the creativity I was hoping for, the Callisto Protocol is the most disappointing game of the year. Welcome to the broadcast, my name is Naj, and before we begin, a huge thanks to Krafton for providing the channel with a copy of the game for this review. It is massively appreciated, thanks to you and my viewers for supporting the channel and my compulsive need to play video games. So, the Callisto Protocol. A third-person survival horror game taking place on Callisto, a moon which houses Black Iron, a maximum security prison where razors and porridge and dropping a bar of soap in the shower sounds like a joyride compared to the rehabilitation programs on offer. Played by the Soldier Boy from Michael Bay's Transformers, we take control of Jacob, whose job it is to transport cargo to and from Black Iron. During his final job of transporting medical supplies to the prison, which promises the big bucks, his ship is attacked by a group of terrorists, causing it to crash on Callisto. Greeted by Captain Ferris, Jacob and the woman responsible for the crash are seized following orders from the prison marshal and thrown in the slammer, not before being implanted with some sort of surveillance device that conveniently acts as a health bar.
That device! No! No! You're a goddamn doctor!
Yes, and I intend to faithfully execute my responsibilities. Try not to move, it'll only make things worse.
No! Fuck you!
Following some weird dreamy visions, Jacob awakes to find the prison has been the target of a biological attack, turning them into monsters referred to as biophages. Our goal? Get the fuck out. It's a simple story and kind of predictable with its few twists and turns, but it was enjoyable enough, held up by great motion capture and voice acting by the few characters. However, the setup for me was better than the overall execution once the story came to a finish. The prison and moon setting itself visually is a gorgeous and well-crafted spectacle, a beautiful location for the story to take place with fantastic lighting, particle effects, character animations with crazy good-looking sweat effects. I mean, everyone is literally dripping with moisture. And great audio design with the distant shrieks of the creatures and the inner voice of Jacob closing in on you as you explore places like the isolated solitary confinement.
Jacob!
The opening hour or so of the game promised me a more intriguing story with these visions in this horrific setting that it kind of reminded me of The Suffering with a sci-fi tone, which excited me very much. However, it never really dived into the psychological side of it despite first impressions, and I would have liked a little more suspense and originality to its narrative, but what we have is pretty much to the point, and it tells the story it wants to tell, also leaving it open for a sequel promising something much larger within this new world. A world that was actually once originally supposed to take place in the PUBG universe, but that concept was ultimately scrapped. Now, the developers Striking Distance have said that with the Callisto Protocol, their aim was to create a terrifying next-generation survival horror experience, and when it comes to the fundamentals of what makes a good survival horror game, the Callisto Protocol looks stunning, but is for the most part incredibly disappointing. Most of its interesting concepts result in a lack of tension or fear, as they are sucked out due to subpar design choices. Now, when the game released, an abundance of technical issues were reported, so I do want to mention how surprised I was with how well the game ran. I had some visual glitches like pop-in, such as logos disappearing off barrels and things like that, but I didn't have any real performance issues that hindered my experience with the game. It ran very well and very smooth. I was playing on a PS5 after the initial patches though, which probably cleared up some of the issues people are complaining about, and I cannot speak for other consoles or PC. With performance though, what did take me out of the immersion often was the audio. I'm not sure if this was the audio glitching or it just wasn't mixed very well, but whenever I would enter a new room, the audio would drop and change suddenly within the room. Now, this would happen with the ambient music suddenly stopping or restarting its loop, or environmental sounds like ventilation or the chugging of engines just coming to a stop to create a silent atmosphere. And it wasn't the machinery itself stopping, because I would walk back into the previous room and it would start again, so it seems to me like certain pieces of audio were only programmed for the room with the source of the sound, rather than naturally fading with the more distance between the audio source and myself.
UGC printing for all your needs.
It was quite jarring when this happened and broke the immersion more times than I would have liked, but from a technical point of view this was really the only issue I came across during my playthrough. It's clear a lot of work and passion went into creating an atmospheric experience, but it is short-lived. It comes wrapped up in a pretty bow, but the contents of the box are frustratingly shallow, with Exhibit A being the game's combat. Now honestly, I was actually quite surprised the combat system is primarily melee combat, equipped with a stun baton and a collection of guns that are more like support items than primary weapons. And if one thing is for sure, the combat is brutal, incredibly gory, and has some satisfying weight behind it at times. I like the idea of melee combat, I wasn't against it at all. When going one-on-one against the biophages, it does have some impact with the over-the-top violence which I really liked. Taking these guys down with a few swings of the baton into a finisher feels good, and with this comes some insane death animations for your character. They are so sadistic, they often drove me to the point of nervous laughter, but more on these shortly. In addition to the melee combat, we have 5 guns: a magnum-like pistol, a weaker pistol with a faster rate of fire, a sworn-off shotgun, a pump-action shotgun, and an assault rifle. We're also equipped with a glove that has the ability to put the creatures into a stasis-like hold, so you can throw them around into environmental hazards. All of these can be upgraded at one of the 3D printers located throughout the levels, which I really liked. They actually look pretty cool as you're upgrading them, and to obtain the guns you will locate schematics throughout the game to take to the printer, and each gun is a different attachment to the initial grip, and these are added to the more you upgrade them, although the cosmetic looks don't really affect how Jacob handles the guns. For instance, for putting a grip on a magnum for stability, Jacob still holds the gun the same way and does not use the grip for that more stable shot. It just kinda looks weird. You can also upgrade their damage and magazine size, and each fully upgraded weapon will have an alternative firing mode. For example, the Magnum will fire a large explosive round, but this will use up to 5 rounds of regular ammunition for that weapon. The guns can become very powerful, becoming more prominent later in the game, especially when up against boss-type enemies. The game is clearly focused on its melee systems, which appear far more interesting at first than they actually are. Your baton has light attacks with R2 and heavy attacks with R1, the former of which I found myself using the most when bashing in skulls, and you will need to evade enemies as much as you attack them in the game's simple dodge mechanics that make you either untouchable or absolutely slammed. All but 2 enemy types use nothing but melee attacks, running at you waving their arms like they just don't care. However, regardless of which direction they come at me from or which limb they are using to attack, all I had to do was move to the left or right and alternate the direction once I had evaded an attack. Shimmying either direction would automatically make Jacob dodge the attack. Once dodged, move in the opposite direction and he would dodge again. When I was first introduced to the combat, I thought it was going to be pretty challenging, but it turns out I was just trying too hard. I was trying to evade the attack at the right time off the swing and move in the direction of the incoming attack, so when the biophage attacked me with his left arm, I would dodge in that particular direction. However, I soon discovered I was doing it all wrong and that the game actually did the work for me. Once I realised this, I became invincible when going head to toe with an enemy, and this was incredibly disappointing as it instantly removed all my fears and anxieties of coming across the creatures lurking in the dark, because they were no longer a threat. Everything is just so automatic, with the only real input from the player being acknowledging how many swings the enemy will throw at you before you can go in for the 3-hit combo. Some enemies do block you and push back, but you will just fall into the same cha-cha slide like you're at your aunt's 50th birthday party. On the opposite scale, you have moments of fighting multiple enemies at once, and we go from one extreme to the other as the combat system just isn't designed for it. Jacob's movements feel sluggish when facing off against multiple enemies. due to the animations being slow when you dodge, and they cannot be stopped by the player mid-animation, meaning if you have multiple foes coming at you, you are evading one biophage at a time, but another will just get you as you cannot dodge more than one at a time. So what we have is a melee system that is either frustratingly brain dead in its ease and simplicity, or frustratingly difficult due to the simple design not being developed enough for large groups of enemies. Now you do have the status throw to pull enemies out and away from you or into a hazard, but the battery life on this is quite low, so unless you have some top ups in your inventory, you can only do this for a couple of enemies before you are backed up into a corner unable to evade. The game has a targeting system with its combos. Stagger an enemy and the game will prompt you to aim at a weak spot and get a couple of shots in for additional damage. This is definitely useful as the weaker biophages will begin to transform into stronger ones following a few attacks, which is signalled by a mutation of wiggly worms in their chest. Shoot this during the combo and it should take the enemies out before they turn into stronger enemies, which adds a time scale to defeating the enemies before they get more aggressive, which I liked. Now this leads me into the enemy variety, of which there is very little, which does not help in keeping the combat fresh. There are around 5, maybe 6 different enemy types of biophages in the game, including the bosses, with most being very similar to each other in both their visual design and attacks. You have your most common in the standard infected grunt, still reminiscent of the prisoners or officers they used to be, a larger, stronger version of them that have slightly better defense, projectile enemies that throw green acid-like goo at you who will resort to melee combat should you get too close, and all of these ones are humanoid street fighters. One of the biggest issues with the creatures is again there is no real horror here. They are grotesque, brutal, and have a fascination with crushing your skull, but that is all they are. Brutes. Good survival horror games make the player fear the monsters, building up the tension of not knowing who, what, or where the threats are coming from until they are in your face like a screaming 3-year-old covered in jam. But the creatures here become very generic quick due to the lack of tension building. For instance, let me show you the first encounter with one of these monstrosities. We are introduced to the combat by fighting off 2 rioting prisoners. Side note, the only time you come across hostile human characters in the game. And once we've caved in one's head and thrown the other off a ledge, Jacob turns around in the heat of the moment to see a biophage. I mean, where did it even come from? It's like it just appeared out of thin air. No build-up of being stalked by an unseen foe, no glimpses in the distance of something hunting me, just straight up served on a platter for a butchering, and it is as if it's the most natural thing in the world from Jacob as he stands there covered in blood just staring into space. About halfway through the game it does mix it up a bit as I came across some blind enemies that detect you by sound, reminiscent of the clickers from The Last of Us. To take them out we have to crouch around to reduce noise and perform stealth takedowns with a shiv from behind, but despite being blind I think they've also lost all their other senses, as you could be within an inch of another blind enemy as you are taking one down, which makes more noise than firework knife. And they don't batter an eyelid, if they can do such a thing. There are 2 boss type enemies in the game, a 2-headed behemoth and the final boss that has a couple of different stages, and despite their appearances there are no real differences in gameplay mechanics with these. If anything, they are much slower than the regular enemies, but do an enormous amount of damage that they can one-hit kill you even on normal difficulty. But you will get into the rhythm of dodging once, pumping a couple of shotgun shells into its flesh, and so on. Unless of course the game bugs out on you and you take out a boss with a couple of shots and a hit to the stomach. Underwhelming. Now going back to those death animations, each enemy has their own. They are brutal and you almost want to die sometimes to see exactly how they take you out. But regardless of their design, almost every death animation results in them either beating your face to a pulp in an assortment of ways, or tearing off your limbs. As enjoyable as they are to watch, the lack of enemy variety results in a desire for some more creatively grotesque deaths after you have seen Jacob's head caved in a dozen times. It grows quite repetitive and it's just not scary. The game lacks any sort of tension. There are a few jump scares in the game, usually a biophage jumping through a vent or a window, or we have these hidden enemies as well. Heads with long necks that reach out and bite you, dragging you towards your death. Rapidly pressing a button prompt will detach them from you as you cut through their neck with your shiv, and they can be seen if you are looking for them. However, there are times where they are right around the corner and they give you a bit of a jump scare. But even these moments lose their fear factor pretty quickly, as I soon came to realise each time it was unavoidable, there was a health pickup to compensate for the damage taken in the same room or the next, removing the need to be cautious of your surroundings. It's like being spat in the face by a stranger for that person to then say keep the change as they give you a £50 note to wipe it from your face. And with that and the minding of your surroundings, there is actually very little in the way of exploration and coming upon random encounters in the game. The Callisto Protocol is a very linear experience. There are a couple of occasions where there would be two paths to choose from, one being the way to progress and the other to take you to a room for some loot, or underground cave with a secret location in it to just add to the lore. Outside of this though, there is no exploration of the prison or planet off the beaten path, and many times you are unable to go back on yourself to check that alternative way if you choose the correct one in the first place, because the door behind you will lock or something will happen to cause some sort of blockage, preventing you from backtracking. This is frustrating when you have to leave items such as ammo, health and scrap to sell for upgrade credits, with the game's limited inventory space. Limited inventory space and item management is a must-have for survival horror games. However, there are no item boxes here to store any items you currently do not wish to carry, and removing the freedom to backtrack, many items will be left behind, so you have to prioritise what you carry. You may come across a new weapon schematic, but you have to drop some scrap or health injections to pick them up, and inventory space cannot be upgraded beyond the one time you do from going from the prison jumpsuit to a better outfit. These tight corridors you'll be traversing through are sometimes connected by vents to crawl in or tight gaps to squeeze through, and these do not help with the level design as they are so frequent and bring the game to a slog. It's like the level designers played God of War for inspiration and came to the assumption everybody's favourite bit of the game was a big bold man between a rock and a hard place, so gave it to us over and over and over again. In fact, it reminds me of a game I reviewed not too long ago, The Order 1886, with how everything just feels like it is made to slow you down in the need to make everything cinematic, but it just does the opposite. Speaking of which, you will find audio tapes for prison personnel and prisoners themselves, and you have to listen to these in the menu. You cannot walk or even check your inventory as you listen to these. You just stand there spinning around as you listen. It's pretty weird. In fact, the entire design of Black Iron Prison is just so strange. Now, a lot of this is for gameplay purposes, particularly to make use of the force throw glove, which is understandable, but if you are an inmate in this prison looking to whack some punk, no need to waste a perfectly suitable toothbrush by making a shiv. Just push someone against the many spiky walls or huge industrial fans. This must be one of the most dangerously designed prisons in the world, and one of the easiest to escape. Every secure area has a box that can be pried open and cut to allow access to restricted areas. It's a wonder no one escaped before the shit hit one of the many fans. As a fan myself of Dead Space and survival horror games in general, I can tell the Callisto Protocol tries to be the next generation of the genre. It wears all of its inspiration on its sleeve, yet attempts to have its own identity by differentiating itself with its melee combat, its brutality, and by taking a cinematic approach to its presentation with fantastic graphics, motion capture, and just the abundance of gore. And for that, I do commend it for trying, but everything just feels underdeveloped, boiling down to an experience that is more frustrating than it is scary, more exhausting than it is gripping, and ultimately more forgettable than I had imagined in the hype. But hey, this is all just my opinion. What do you guys think? Did you like it? Did you hate it? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching. Thanks again to Krafton for the copy of the game. Give it a thumbs up if you liked the video, subscribe to the channel, and see you on the next one.